She reigned as queen, officially speaking, for 13 days, but is known more commonly as the 9 Days Queen. I'm speaking, of course, about Lady Jane Grey, who hit the headlines a couple of weeks ago when news broke that a portrait, quite possibly of Jane, painted from life, resurfaced with fresh evidence and insight. Well, today I'm thrilled to welcome Rachel Turnbull onto the podcast. Rachel is Senior Collections Conservator in Fine Art for English Heritage and was the person at the very centre of this discovery and examination. Rachel joined me to discuss the research, what new features from the portrait were discovered for the first time, and what changes were made to the portrait, likely long after the original painting was completed, to change the way that the sitter is presented. Welcome back to the Tudor Chest podcast, episode 80, The Face of Lady Jane Grey with Rachel Turnbull. Welcome to the Tudor Chest podcast, Rachel Turnbull. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thanks. You're here today to talk about the very exciting news that broke out everywhere a couple of weeks ago about a portrait that you believe could be Lady Jane Grey, that you've been heavily involved in the project around this portrait. Before we get into that, though, just a few questions to get to know you a bit better, if that's okay. So could you provide me with a short introduction to your background, so where you grew up and what you now do full-time?
So I grew up in Yorkshire, had a lovely life in the Pennines, and then I moved, went to university in Scotland, and then I went down to London and studied at the Collections Conservation for 3 years. I went on to work in the National Museum in Wales, and then I, via the V&A, ended up at English Heritage, and I look after all their paintings, about 1,400 paintings across the whole country. And I also am responsible for all the wall paintings as well. That's wall paintings at about 80 sites. And I have a little team. Right. There are 3 of us. That's what I do. Amazing.
What part of Yorkshire did you grow up in?
I grew up in South Yorkshire, on the edge of the Pennines, a place called Penistone.
Oh, okay, cool. The reason I ask is my dad's a Yorkshireman.
Is he?
Yeah, he's from Batley in West Yorkshire.
Oh, well, my first 10 years, I lived in Carlinghau, which is just next door to Batley.
Ah, well, you'll know Birstall then. That's where he's actually from. He's from Birstall, which is in Batley. It's where my grandma still is now at the age of nearly 102.
Wow, that's a good age, isn't it?
Yeah, and she lives alone. You know, doesn't even have a downstairs toilet. So
well done her.
She's remarkable. So what sparked your passion for English history, I suppose art history? Was there something growing up, or can you remember something that sparked your passion?
Yeah. I was at school, and my art teacher, I was quite good at art, but she could see that I didn't want to be an artist. I didn't have that sort of vocation. But she talked about conservation, and she said she thought it might be something I should look into, and it stuck with me, basically. And I just held on to that idea throughout all of my choices for university, doing art history, and then obviously I got the place at the Courtauld studying conservation. So yeah, it was an art teacher at school.
Nice. So if you could pick a single moment from history to go back and witness, you could jump in a time travel machine, what would it be?
Well, that's interesting. I think I've been thinking a lot about obviously about Tudor painting in recent months, and I think it would be really good fun to go back and just observe what was going on in the workshops at that time. You know, what was Holbein doing, and how did that all work? And as a conservator and as art historians, you do lots of detective work, which we're going to talk about a little bit today, looking into how we can try and understand what was happening, but to go and see it in real life and see how close we have got to understanding the processes and the materials and the techniques that they were using, I think that would be fascinating.
Yeah, and even more, if you could jump in a time, if you could go back and actually meet Lady Jane Grey, we'd know beyond all doubt whether.
Yes, I mean that would be amazing. Who was this mysterious lady, and is it her?
Yeah.
We don't know.
So, as I said at the start, we're here to talk about Jane Grey, but specifically around the portrait that was all over the news a couple of weeks ago because it is such an exciting find. So, to start, can you introduce the portrait to me? What are we looking at in this portrait?
So it's a relatively small painting on oak panel. It depicts a quite young lady, or a girl, and she's wearing quite a plain black outfit with some black work embroidery at the neck, and she has a little posy at her neck, and she's clasping a book. Her dress is plain black, as I've said, and the background is very dark, and she's wearing a white, what looks like a white linen coif or head covering most of her hair, and that's what we have.
So, and from the photos that were released, it looks to be 3/4 length. Is
Yes.
there any evidence that it was at one stage full length and had been cut down, or as best we can tell, the portrait is as it was when it was created?
No, it's not been cut down. It is the same size. The panel hasn't been changed in any way. The only thing that has happened to it is in the past at some point the panel joint is in two planks or two boards, and there has been a repair made to the back. But apart from that, it is exactly the same size as it would have been originally.
Got it. Okay. It's housed at Rest Park. Do we know how they acquired it and how long it's been in their possession?
So one of the previous family members in 1701 from the collection of a Lady Dacre, and in turn whose collection was, we think, from a different man's collection, formed part of her collection, and it was remained in the house then for 200 years up until 1917, when the collection was dispersed because the family couldn't keep the property on, and the property was sold, and it's been in a private collection since there. So it's really fun that it's come back to Rest Park now after 100 years and is back in the house where it had hung for the previous 200 years.
Nice. So you mentioned that the sister is wearing black with sort of the white headdress and everything. Does the dress actually tell us that this is someone nobly born? Because things like, black dyes and stuff were very expensive. So does the clothing help ascertain who this could be?
It's interesting because the people have talked about, other historians have talked about the fact that it's not a very regal attire. It's quite simple and it's quite plain. She's wearing the linen cap, and if you think of a stereotypical Tudor female royal portrait, they would then have a hood on top of the coif, so a more decorative headpiece, and the black outfit.
A French hood or a gable.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. And the cloth as we see it today is quite plain. But what we have discovered is that all is not quite as it seems, and there was a change made to the costume, or changes made to the costume quite early on. We think, we don't know exactly when, but certainly pre-1681, the costume was changed quite a lot.
I see. Okay. I mean, that was one of the things that I thought about was that headdress, because it isn't to your point, the stereotypical headdress that we would see in portraiture of notable Tudor women. They're either normally in the French hood, or by the time you get to Mary I, the sort of squared off French hood. So that aspect of it did strike me as a bit unusual. But one of the things that a lot of people actually commented when I shared the pictures on my Instagram, a lot of people said, there is a familial resemblance there to Mary, to Elizabeth. So there's the visible copper hair. Did those things also lead to helping you identify that the sitter could be Lady Jane Grey?
No, it's probably not quite the way that we thought about it, because this portrait has been known to be or said to be Lady Jane Grey right back as far as the late 17th century. We worked on the basis, starting from the point that it could be her. So things like a kind of a likeness in the face, and looking at it in that way, we didn't really think of it like that. And the other thing about the copper hair is, I think the hair probably was kind of copper coloured originally, but what you see today again is part of the set of changes that were made very early on in the 17th century, covering up actually a little bit of what I think might have been a hood that was painted out. So she originally wearing a hood over the top? There are definitely significant changes that you can see in infrared reflectography. There is some embroidery in parallel lines around the front of the what would be the hood over her forehead, and it curves around in a much more curvy shape around her ear, and then hair has been subsequently then painted in over the top of that, to kind of create this sort of like a dog leg in the way that the quack kind of it folds. If you've got the image in front of you, you'd be able to have a look at it. It folds around, and that isn't how it was originally. And I also think that you can possibly see in the background evidence that there was a veil, sort of, if that's the right terminology, associated with a hood that would run down the back of the sitter's hair as well, and that's been changed as well.
I see. Okay, are there any inscriptions on the portrait?
So there is an inscription that identifies her as Lady Jane Grey, but that's much later. That will have been put on by the family after it was purchased for display at Rest Park, and we find the same and similar inscriptions on lots of the paintings from Rest Park. They obviously employed somebody to go around and put inscriptions on, identifying the family members, and making them a piece so people could know who they were looking at. So it does have an inscription, but it's not contemporary with when the painting was made. Okay.
Do we know when it was first suggested that it could be Lady Jane Grey?
So the first documented evidence is from 1681, where it was engraved for a book on the Reformation. And that woodcut, if you Google Lady Jane Grey, you will find lots of images of woodcuts, and it does become a kind of archetypal image of Lady Jane Grey. And it's based on this portrait. It's changed a little bit. It's been embellished a little. But it is from that time, from 1681, when it was first sort of documented as her. My guess is, and this is purely conjecture, if it was engraved in 1681 to put in a book as being Lady Jane Grey, it must have been thought to have been her for some period of time pre that date. Otherwise, why would it have been engraved? But we have no concrete evidence to back that up pre that date.
Okay, that makes sense. But based on this then, and the fact that it's been mooted as Jane for a long time, what led to your re-examination of this portrait? How did your involvement in this take off?
So we were very generously offered from a series of private lenders a suite of about 20 paintings that have got relationship to Rest Park, and they were offered on very long-term loan back to English Heritage, which is absolutely fantastic. And as part of our kind of due diligence and our work to prepare for those loans back into the collection, we look at all of those paintings. And obviously, as soon as you start looking at a picture like this one, we did a little bit of research and looking at what had been written about her before. She was exhibited in 2007 by in the Philip Moll Galleries, and Bendel Grosvenor has written in the catalogue for that about suggesting that that this painting should be revisited. Other people have subsequently written and said they're not so sure about whether it is or not her. So it felt like it was a good candidate for us to look at a little more closely. One of the things that we do in the studio, as a matter of course for all paintings that come through, is we look at them with infrared, because we're lucky enough to have a piece of equipment you never know with infrared what you're going to find until you actually carry out the analysis. And so we did the same thing to Lady Jane Grey as we did to all the other paintings, and we found these changes and really got us thinking, well, this is new evidence that nobody has seen before. This is a painting that has sparked an awful lot of debate amongst historians. So let's pursue it a little bit further, and that's what we've been doing over the last few months.
Yeah, because it's, again, Lady Jane Grey was she was a member of the royal family, yes, extended royal family, but it's always struck me that this is a young woman who would have been painted. There would have been portraits of her, and despite her sticky end, it's not a situation where, I feel like it wouldn't have been a situation where Mary was ordering her portraits destroyed. So I've always thought there must be something out there, but because we've never had a definitive, it's that classic thing of it could have been hiding in plain sight all along kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I mean it's really intriguing, and she was only queen for the 9 days, but yes, as you say, there must have been images of her, and who knows? I mean, we know we dendrochronology was done back in 2007, but we repeated it. We happened to have the dendrochronologist in the studio, and we knew that worked for us just to kind of corroborate those dates. And the other thing that he found is that he found a merchant's mark on the back of the panel at the same time, and that is also really intriguing because that's found on the back of a painting of Edward VI, which may mean nothing, or it might be really, it might be really interesting. I mean, the merchant's mark is the mark that was put on by the person who would have brought the wood over from the Baltic regions. That's way near, as you know, today. And then the panels would have come over to Western Europe, and then they would have probably gone to a panel maker, and then the wood would have been split down and made into panels for artists. So the fact that we have another picture of Lady Jane Grey's predecessor with the same merchant's mark, does it mean something, or is it just chance? We can't really tell.
So the fact that the mark is the same one, that suggests then that both these pieces of wood, they've been sold potentially then at the same time. So these portraits have been painted around the same time.
Around the same time, yeah, for sure. But it may not mean anything. We certainly have seen evidence with dendrochronology and other things, English heritage, where you find a panel from a tree that's by one artist, and the dendrochronologist has been able to identify the same a piece of wood from the same tree being used by a different but contemporary artist. So it you think, yeah, this is a smoking gun, it's definitely by the same artist, but it's not quite as straightforward as that. We can't say for sure, and it's probably, you just have to take all these little bits of evidence and add them together and see if we think that, combined it adds up to anything. But it's not a definitive piece of evidence, but it's intriguing.
How does it work for people who maybe don't know what dendrochronology is? What's the process?
Well, I'm not the expert, that's for sure. I certainly don't do it myself. It's a statistical technique, and the different tree rings will be different sizes depending on where the tree is growing and when the tree is growing, dependent on the weather and the climate, and through lots of big databases that exist measuring these different tree rings, the dendrochronologists are able to place pieces of wood, if they're oak, in time, and also to a lesser extent, but increasingly so in exact sort of places in the world. So in the Baltic region, in this case, which is quite a broad geographical area, but yeah.
So you mentioned the infrared technology that you've got, which is what enabled you to figure out that there have been some significant changes made to this portrait over the years, including the clothing. So what are these changes, and are there any theories as to why the changes took place?
So talked a bit already about the potentially being a hood over the coif. There are also significant changes to the sleeves. So at the moment, she's depicted with a tight sleeve around the upper arm, broadening out into a slightly odd kind of wider cuff, which doesn't quite make sense when you see it with bright light on it. And then she's got a sort of a small white, it's been described by others as a handkerchief, her top of her shoulders, which is a sort of quite unusual look. What I can see in infrared reflectography is that the sleeves were one of two things. Either the sleeves were very tight at the top of the arm and then broadened out into a big bell shape at the bottom, or her sleeves were very tight at the top and she had a stole or scarf draped over her lower arms with sort of folds of fabric. And either of those two sort of costumes, if you like, can be seen in paintings that are contemporary with this one. We thought at first that there might be an indication that there was brocade underneath the black, but actually on re-looking at that in some other techniques, we've been lucky enough to work with experts at the Courtauld doing some different kind of scanning, some XRF scanning, which gives you elemental maps of the painting. I'm not sure that it is a brocade, but it is something that I'm going to investigate a little bit further to find out, because that would be amazing. But I'm not quite sure that's the case. I think it might be more likely to be some damage under the current paint.
What's the sort of at the neck? She's wearing. There's like this sort of floral, like this sort of floral thing that looks like it's hanging from a necklace, but it doesn't as well. Do we have any sense on what that actually is?
They supposedly are flowers, and lots of things have been written about the significance. I mean, flowers, have always had symbolic meanings, and I can't tell you what they are off the top of my head, but lots of people have written about these flowers and tried to identify them. And depending on who you think it might be, you would give a slightly different kind of meaning to some of those flowers potentially. But it is really interesting. And the fact that it's sort of upside down. So is it hanging from the pearl necklace or quite what is going on? What I am sure about is that those are original, because I can see underdrawing of those flowers in infrared. So that's telling me that I'm pretty sure that is an original feature. So that's not been fiddled with at a later date.
Yeah, it's just unusual, isn't it? Because normally we see flowers in lots of Tudor portraiture, but normally the sitter is maybe holding them, or they're sort of woven into the dress or something. But it's this sort of spray of this posy, as you said, but almost like tucked into the center at the breast. It's just a bit weird, the positioning of it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't know. Was it? She was a young woman who, whoever she is, she was a young woman, and is it something that she did unconsciously, or was it deliberately placed like that to have really important symbolic meaning? Again, we're back to our time machine and going back and seeing what was happening at the time and whose decision that was. Was it a really deliberate choice that somebody made to kind of convey a specific message that maybe is a little bit lost to us today, or was it just what a young girl did? I don't know.
I believe that the position of the eyes was also changed at one stage. Why would this be done? I
don't know. So the eyes themselves, the position, if you imagine the painted eye socket, that hasn't changed, but the irises, that's the word, have changed direction. They were looking the other way. And I don't know why that is. It's very strange. And I can't think of a particular reason that was done. And maybe the artists just changed their mind. I mean, that does happen quite frequently, in the creative process. So, yeah.
Because at the moment they're looking at you, aren't they? But under the infrared, we can see that they were looking the other way. They're right, our left.
Yeah. Don't know. Can't tell you the answer to that, but it's very intriguing.
Something else that you discovered is that at one stage the eyes, ears, and mouth were scratched out. Now, why would that have been done? And do we know when the repairs were carried out? So, one might assume that it was an iconoclastic attack. She was a contentious figure in terms of her Protestant faith versus the Catholic faith of Mary.
who followed her. So if it had been known to be Lady Jane Grey, perhaps someone did that as a form of protest. We haven't restored the painting at all, really. She's just been reframed her, basically, and the scratching out is as it was. I can't date that. I don't know when it happened. It certainly happened a long time ago. It's definitely not recent. It could easily have been a couple of 100 years ago that happened, or pre the point when it was purchased by the Duke of Kent. So we don't really know. I mean, they're left. They're there. You can see those scratches on her. The Stretton portrait of Lady Jane Grey, which is in the National Portrait Gallery, is similarly scratched through the face. So yeah, but because we can't say exactly when it happened, we don't really know.
I seem to recall also reading in the reports that some of the changes made to the clothing actually could have also been from a religious perspective, but to her supporters. What's that? What's the theory there?
Well, again, this is purely conjecture, but one could imagine a possibility. One could imagine all sorts of possibilities, but one of the things you could imagine, that if this was to have been, or if this was a contemporary portrait of Lady Jane Grey before she was executed, possibly somebody in more regal regalia, maybe. She then subsequently, after her execution, was painted out in a more demure fashion to represent this sort of Protestant aesthetic, if you like, that she was a bit of a figurehead for that religion. So yeah, but it's pure conjecture. There's no way that we can prove that. We know there was a change, but the motivation behind that change and the exact date at which that occurred, we can't say for sure.
Yeah, I do know that. And this actually could be a piece of evidence that that supports the fact that it could be Jane Grey. I do know that she actually eschewed quite opulent dress. She was, I remember one year she was gifted some material by Mary, her cousin, before Mary was queen, and she said, I don't know what to do with it. It's far too over the top and grand for me. I'd rather dress more plainly. So maybe if this was, you could argue maybe then that if this was contemporary, when it was presented to Jane Grey, maybe she said, no, that clothing's too rich. I want to be more muted. Who knows?
Who knows? I mean, this is why this kind of research is really fascinating, because you have some facts. We have some facts about this physical object, but then you move beyond the facts to try and create a narrative to explain them, and you can go in any number of directions. It's really interesting.
So my final question for you then is, what is the future works planned for this portrait, and will people be able to go and see it?
Yeah, so she's on display right now at Rest Park in Bedfordshire. It's a beautiful site if you've never been. Glorious gardens with fountains, and yeah, absolutely lovely. So she'll be on permanent display there.
Amazing. And is there any future work planned on the portrait, or is it just going back to its home?
It's going back to its home. I'm going to do a little bit more work on looking at some of the technical information and processing some of those pieces of information that we've got. But that's it really. She's there now, and it's really up to everyone to go and have a look at her and see what they think. And if anyone's, real budding historians out there, we find out the early provenance of the painting, that would be amazing. But she's there for everyone to go and see.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. People are keen to keep up to date with your work. Are you on social media at all?
I'm afraid I'm not, no. There are things, if you go onto the English Heritage channel on YouTube, though, you can find various videos about painting conservation at English Heritage and some other projects that we've been involved with.
Nice. And what are you, if you're able to say, what are you working on at the moment?
So I'm on site at the moment. I'm working at the moment at Apsley House in central London, preparing for an exhibition on the Dutch Golden Age, which will be opening in a few weeks' time. And then I'm straight up to Kenwood House next week to prepare for another exhibition on Sargent's American heiresses, which will be opening in May. So that's two really exciting exhibitions that English Heritage are putting on in the coming months.
Wonderful. Well, I shall definitely have to check some of those out. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much again for coming onto the podcast, and we'll speak soon.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And so that brings us to the end of this week's episode of the Tudor Chess podcast. My thanks again to Rachel Turnbull for coming onto the show, and thank you, the listener, for supporting the channel. I do release weekly subscriber-only episodes which feature just me, and each time I pick a key figure from the world of the Tudors, but one most people don't know a lot about. From Henry VIII's illegitimate uncle, Arthur Plantagenet, to Eleanor Brandon, the younger and far lesser known sister of Frances Grey, the mother of Lady Jane. These can be accessed through either Patreon or Apple podcast subscriptions. Just search for The Tudor Chest. Next week, I'm welcoming back Heather Darcy onto the podcast, this time for a discussion all about the earlier, happier years of Catherine of Aragon's time as Queen of England. Thank you again for listening to the Tudor Chess podcast, and speak soon.